My name's Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. And I'll figure this out. Don't worry about it. I'm 77 years old. So I'm going to talk about the fifth step or something thereabouts. I think the fifth step will be in there somewhere. And I come at it from a different... So listen, here's the deal. Bill Wilson, and sometimes people get upset with me because they think I'm like knocking Bill Wilson. I would not knocking Bill Wilson. I love Bill Wilson as Bill sees it. If it wasn't for Bill Wilson, I wouldn't be sober. It so happens there's a point in time that I came to in my life, somewhere around 10 or 15 or 20 years, where I started looking more at Dr. Bob. Just my view. They had the same program. They had the same steps. They had everything was the same, but they did it differently. In order for you to understand how different Bill Wilson was from Dr. They loved each other. Bill loved Bob. Bob loved Bill. And there were people that were Bill people, and they loved Bill. And there were people that were Bob people, and they loved Bob. And if you ever read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, which I really suggest you read, encourage you to read that. It was written in 1980. Big Book was written in 1939. Program started in 1935. Big Book written in 1939. I'm thinking that in the 1950s or something, it was when Bill had 15 years. He was the guy with the longest sobriety. He wrote the 12 and 12. And then a few years later, he wrote The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. And what you could see, if you read all that stuff, is you'll see a tremendous change in Bill. But Bob sort of remained steady with his deal. And Bob was of a different sort of deal. Bob was born again Christian. He slipped once after he came in, but he was one of those guys, you know? And he's the one who said in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, so this is about, which by the way is conference approved. So everything I say is conference approved. You understand? Bob is the guy who says, the Big Book says, rarely have we seen a person fail. I like sentences. I don't like, I'm a lawyer and I'm an alcoholic. So if you're a lawyer, you're an alcoholic, you can always find a loophole, an excuse. Like some guy said he would have been here, but he had to shampoo the canary or something. You can always find an excuse. That sounds good. Sounds good to you. Sounds good to me. I'm a rationalizer. I tell myself rational lies. Lies that make perfect sense to you. And so what happens is Bill Wilson writes this thing called The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety, and published in 1958 in Grapevine. And he wrote it. Did Bill Wilson know how to do the steps, you think? You think Bill Wilson knew anything about the steps, anything about what he wrote in the steps, you know? Do you think he was divinely inspired? I think he was. No question about it. Do you think Bill Wilson loved the fellow? Do you think he went to meetings? I think he went to meetings. You know, so you think he sort of understood this stuff? He thought he understood this stuff. There was only one problem. Bill Wilson, by the time he hit 20 years, he was a basket case. Now, before you judge me for saying this about Bill Wilson, he had the guts, courage, or whatever it is he felt he needed to do to write this all down in like a 4-page essay. And you need to read the essay. And you need to read the lines in the essay. And the truth of the matter is, having gone through what he went through, hitting bottom in much the same way as you hit bottom with drinking, having hit the same kind of bottom, the emotional bottom, without drinking and staying in the program, I understood what he was talking about. So when you have gone through the same experience that somebody's been through, well, for instance, when somebody gets here and talks about the drinking deal, when you get to a point in your life, I was at a point in my life where my life was over. It was never going to get better again. I was in some sort of place where I was without hope. This is December of 1981, December of 1980, December 25th, Christmas morning, 1980. I could not envision life without drinking. I couldn't envision life without drinking. There was no way I could envision life without drinking. And I thought there was no way I could stop drinking. And I knew I was done for. And some guy got on TV. I turned it on at 2 o'clock in the morning and started talking about Jesus. This is my story, and I'm allowed to tell my story. You know why? Because the big book says a lot of stuff. One of the things it says, each alcoholic, in his own language, his own point of view, talks about how he developed his relationship with God. So I will set up. My whole life was devoted to chasing women. You know what I mean? And drinking and hanging around bars and doing what we do. And the whole life was about American Express, money, property, prestige. And I never talked to anybody about God or anything like that. I don't know if it was an atheist or agnostic or anything like that. It just never came up. It wasn't relevant to my life. What was relevant to my life is meeting the guys at the Alibi Lounge and drinking from 4:30 in the afternoon till 4:30 in the morning while I'm with the wife and kid at home and going through it. I mean, I was an alcoholic. So I get to a point where my life becomes totally unmanageable. And I can't stop drinking. I thought my life was over. And this guy comes up on the TV. It was my time. It was my time. Guy comes on TV and he says, yeah. You ever have one of the things that happens to people who come to the AA sometimes is they'll talk about something that happened and they'll say they'll say things like this is the alcohol code. It was like a God thing, or something will happen in your life and you'll say, this has got to be God. It's some sort of, what do we call coincidences? You think about something's happened and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, the chicken comes in from the roof or somebody comes in and says, oh man, this is unbelievable. This is exactly it. It's like a God thing. So it's God. That's happened a million times in my life in the last 46 years. So here I am, and I turn on the TV because, when you're alone and you're lonely and your life is over and you're sitting there alone with your thoughts, I turn on TV and there's a preacher. That must be preacher's favorite times, Christmas. I'm all alone in Christmas. I'm a self-pity-aholic. I realize that I am actually the only person on the planet Earth that doesn't have somebody, I mean, I'm like out there. This preacher comes on, starts talking about his life, giving his testimony, and saying something like words to the effect, if you've gotten to a point in your life where you think your life is over and you have no hope. Now I'm listening to this guy. You understand what I'm saying? I'm like interest. He's got my interest. He said, you had me at hello. He's got my interest. Says you give your life to Jesus. You know what I mean? He will fix everything. So I don't know what you would have done. I don't know what you would have done. Maybe you would have blown that off. It's okay. But I didn't blow it off. And I'm a Jewish kid from Great Neck, Long Island. Okay? He said, get down your knees. And I said say this prayer. And I said the sinner's prayer. And where you accept Jesus in your life and all that sort of stuff. And then everything's supposed to change, whatever. And, nothing major happened in my mind. I mean, a bunch of guys from AA didn't come to my door and knock on it with donuts and say, we got a meeting going on or something like that. As a matter of fact, I continued to drink. But I went to sleep. And maybe I had some sort of hope that something would happen. And I think oftentimes with God, the Lord, in my case, I think oftentimes that happens. Bill Wilson says, the line he says, it says, if you want God to enough, I wanted God when he showed up. And then he says, but soon worldly clamors blotted out his presence. That's what he says. Soon worldly clamors. I went to sleep. I got up. I went to work. And I continued to drink. So obviously nothing happened, right? But you see, God works in strange ways, his miracles to perform. And all I know is 30 days later, I had my last drink that I've ever had a drink in the last 46 years after that. Now, I got into a car accident. I almost died before I stopped drinking. I was in the hospital. And I had an experience. I don't talk about it. I could talk about it. To me, it's not important for me to talk about, but I had a spiritual experience. While in the hospital, my buddy Doug Hartman, who was my drinking buddy, if you ever heard my story, he's the guy who when I said my wife's going to leave me if I come home drunk, he's the one who put his arms around me and said in the bar, said, Russ, your wife loves you. You're the greatest guy in the world. We love you. She's never going to divorce you. You are incredible. You're the greatest guy in the world. And I said, man, that's exactly what I was thinking. So he was a good drinking buddy. And so I continued to drink, and the next day I got kicked out of the house, and that was the end of my marriage. And I went to live with Doug. He said, what? No, let me talk to your wife and talk about it. But Doug Hartman was the guy who saw me in the hospital. I had tubes right inside me. He took out of his little bag right there a cold can of Coors beer, which if you guys don't know because you're too young, there was a time in Miami that you couldn't get Coors beer. And it was like cocaine. You had to have, they used to call them stewardesses. You had to have a stewardess fly it in, undercover. You know what I mean? To bring in Coors beer for you. And I grabbed that thing and I sucked it down, and that's the deal. And while I was that was the last drink I had up to right now. And so what happened was, I'm there in the hospital, and this is, and a guy comes to see me. And that was January 25th, 1981, last drink. And guy comes to see me in a hospital who knew my mother from AA. His name was Bob Sullivan. And he was coming over to see me. I had met Bob once before. And I sort of knew he was probably going to talk to me about the drinking thing. And I had my whole story ready, because if you were going to, I know you're going to talk to me. Yeah, I know you think I have a drinking problem. I'm seeing what you see and knowing what you know, and the car accident and the drunk and all that sort of stuff. He says, but let me explain something to you. I don't have a drinking. And let me tell you something. I graduated with the Department of Honors in Mathematics. I was going for a PhD in algebraic topology. I was a lawyer, major crimes prosecutor. I wasn't a stupid guy, and I was sober in the hospital. I didn't have booze to dull my wits or anything. And he came to see me. I was also to explain to him that I know from where he's standing, he thinks I have a drinking problem. And I'm used to persuading juries, and doing that sort of stuff. And I said, but you don't understand. I said, I don't have a drinking problem. I said, I drink because I have problems. As a matter of fact, the way I see it, my drinking perfectly matches my problems. And one day, my problems are going to go away. I'll get the money, I'll get the girl, I'll get the thing, and I won't have to drink anymore. So thank you very much for your advice, but go fuck yourself, or something. In other words, if you're going to talk to me about my drinking, I don't know whether you know this, but after years of Alcoholics Anonymous and learning a lot of things, alcoholics don't take well to criticism. One of the reasons I always say, why we don't have crosstalk? Because AA sort of started with the Oxford group. And the Oxford group was a bunch of people like us. They met together, but they didn't use the big book. They used the Bible. And they had something called correction. And how correction worked is it would go around the room, they'd read a verse from the Bible or something like that, just like we do here. And some guy would say something that's good. I'm sorry. You got to turn this off. And somebody would talk about their life, with their wife or whatever's going on. Let me turn this off. Yeah. Okay. Talk about their life or whatever's going on.
Magnificent.
Yeah.
Wanted to conquer the very heart of Europe, sending his massive armies.
Yeah. Okay. Just hold that for me. So, what was I talking about?
Talk about their life.
What?
Talk about their life. Was your last sentence.
Talk about their.
The correction.
Oh yeah. So they talk about their life, and somebody in the group would correct them. Don't you wish you could do that? I like to do that. I have meetings where I do that to people, but unlike back then, they actually want that. But that's a whole long story. They need somebody in their life to obnoxiously correct it. But greatest thing in the world is to have somebody that loves you so much that they'll correct you, even at the point where they know they might use you as a friend. Greatest friend you'll ever get, the greatest sponsor you'll ever get, will not treat you lightly, but either gently or not so gently correct you, even to the point of telling you shit you don't want to hear. Because they love you so much, they'll risk your friendship to tell you you're full of shit. And most alcoholics will run away from that and try to find somebody who will agree with them. And the ones that stay sober are the ones that fill their lives with people. You have to look at them and say, are you fucking stupid? And say things. Mean people. Mean sponsors. They'll keep you sober and you'll grow up. But in any event, I digress. In any event, so the deal is, that's the thing. I would say the bottom line, the point is, if you're going to come to me and talk to me about my drinking, that what happened with the Oxford movement is when the alcoholics got corrected, they did not take it kindly. And they would curse or they figured they didn't like the correction thing. So they started their own meetings, and in their own meetings, there was no crosstalk, no correction. You understand? Like there's no correction here, We don't correct each other. We don't comment after somebody talked or something like that, And we don't do that, okay? Because alcoholics are sensitive. Or it's like I used to say to my sponsor, I said, I'm sensitive. He says, no, Russ. He says, great artists are sensitive. You're just touchy, what I mean? So I got no compassion. And so that's the deal. If you're going to tell me anything about myself, I mean, who the hell are you to tell me about myself? I got my program. You got your program. You work your program. I'll work my program. Screw yourself. You know what I mean? It's fun. We got this big book, and we got 1 million people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're all working a different program. Listen, is that interesting? They're all working a different deal, And if you try to tell something, every once in a while, you're going down the freaking tubes, and you're dying, and you're working your program, and you accidentally bump into somebody who's actually got their shit together, and you say, blah, 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 and whoever you bump into is not scared of you, has lost fear of your judgment, and he says, you know why you have problems? Because you're a 2-year-old in the body of a 50-year-old man, and you need to grow the fuck up. You go like that, and all of a sudden you start listening because you've hit a point in your life where you can't help but listen because you're all out of answers. It's like a mini bottom. And you listen to this person, and your entire life changes. You go to a meeting, and you hear somebody say something. You say, that's fucking bullshit. You know what I mean? And then you walk away hating the guy, and then you start thinking about what he said. You say, that's not the truth. Because otherwise, what happens is if you're an alcoholic, you're delusional. You can't separate the true from the false. Your alcoholic life seems normal. The way you think seems normal. And you don't want anybody messing with your thinking, especially when you got 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the heck it is. You don't want that shit happening. But every once in a while, things get bad. And so you run into somebody, and there are some people that actually look for stuff like that, follow people around and do that kind of deal. And so my deal was, if you were going to come after me, you'd talk to me about my alcoholism or my sex life or whatever the hell you're going to talk to me about. You better be prepared for me to talk to you about your mother or something like that. It wasn't going to be easy because we're arrogant and our chief characteristic is being defiant. And the great blessing I had was not that I was smart. As a matter of fact, being smart can kind of screw you up on this thing because you think you're smart. You don't look at all the damage you've caused and all the shit you're doing, My sponsor used to say to me, why do you do the crap you do? Why do you say the stuff you say? I said, well, that's just my personality. That's just my, he'd say, Russell, your personality is killing you. I mean, I know how to stop. How do I change my personality? How do I change it to like a different person? I mean, I got all my defenses. I say, I'll say, well, if it happened to you, you'd do the same thing. If he did that to you, you'd do the same thing. And I'm convinced of that. But what happens when you run into somebody in AA where it happened to them, they don't do anything like it? How do you explain that? Well, if you had all your money stolen, you'd do the same thing. What happens when you run into somebody and you hear a story and all their money's stolen and they're just not presentable? Now, how do you explain that? You say, what happens when you go to me and you see a guy like Al Kennedy? He's trying to help other people and he's loving on other people. And everybody tells an incredible story and he leaves the room and you're smart. And you say, man, I love that guy. I'd like to hang out with him. He says, I said, where does he go to meetings? He says, well, he's dying. I said, what do you mean he's dying? He's dying. What do you mean he's dying? I'm talking about the guy who just spoke. He didn't say anything about dying. I mean, if I had a hangnail, that's good for 3 meetings. You know what I mean about my hangnail? How? What do you mean he's dying? He says, Russ, I don't tell you, he's got terminal cancer. He's got 6 months living. 6 months later, he's dead. Now, if you're an alcoholic and you're not drinking and you got 6 months, well, you're fucking crazy. You know what I mean? You wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're worried about the money, you're worried about this, you're worried about that, and you meet a guy in AA who's dying of cancer, and he's happy. He's the happiest guy in the room. Tell me how you put that together. You understand what I'm saying? In your mind. You know? And all of a sudden you realize, I don't know what that guy has, but I want what he has. And I'm willing to go, but how do you get it? I don't even know what he has. I have no idea what he has. And so as you go along in life, in AA, you bounce into people. I think Alcoholics Number 3 has a great line in it where, Bill Dotson, the man on the bed, says, I was sober, but I knew there was something more, something I hadn't got, something I thought a person ought to have, a release, a happiness, and I didn't have that. I was sober, but I mean, my mind was killing me. And I was trying to find the answer. I'm trying to find the secret. It's got to be something. It's just what I want the answer. I want it now. I want it like a drink. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, in AA, the answer doesn't happen in 5 seconds. Somebody doesn't give you the answer, and all of a sudden, you got 46 years. You know what I mean? And everything changes. Your whole mind changes. What you get is you get an answer that if you listen to it, you change a little bit over what you are. And so that's what you get an answer, and that's what I want. But what I saw was that there were people that were doing the program in such a way so that they were getting different results. They were being rocketed into the 4th dimension of existence. They were experiencing much of heaven. They were peaceful. They lost fear of people. It's almost like when they were talking to people. When I was talking to you, I mean, I'd have the big book open. I'd have it underlined. I'd have it highlighted. You know what I mean? I'd be nervous about what I'm going to say. Sometimes I said, well, I'm not ready. I'd be scared and everything like that. And I mean, and you're seeing people, and it's almost like it's not like they didn't care. It's just they didn't need any props. They didn't need to prepare. They weren't worried about the people in AA talking about. They were just like unfiltered, talking about their lives. And here's the crazy thing. They made sense. And I'd watch, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm used to having murder trials and talking to people, and so I do this for a living, you know what I mean? And I'm scared to talk in AA, though, to you guys. And there's a plumber up there, you understand what I'm saying, who doesn't do what I do, and he's talking to it for an hour off the top of his head, and he's making sense. I says, how do you do that? How do you do that stuff? How do you get up in front of 1,000 people and tell a story and talk to people that makes sense? And you haven't even prepared. You just, I don't know how. You see things in AA that that you're sober 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but there is something more, something you haven't got. So Bill Wilson writes this thing called The Next Frontier, and it's 4 pages. You need to read it, and I can see between the lines what's going on because I've been through it. Because I don't want to say he's vague, but at certain parts he's vague, and I understand why he's vague. But he says this. Let me tell you the parts where he's not vague. He says he started going to a deep depression, and he was really scared. He was scared that he was going to go into a deep depression. I have friends that have 40 years that died sober, depressed. I speak to people that have 30 years who are depressed. Now I know depression is a real disease, okay? But I also know that if you ever find an alcoholic who's filled with self-pity and hasn't gotten this program, the word we use is depressed. I know that alcoholics I know when alcoholics are talking about lust, they use the word love. I know when you understand? I know when alcoholics talk about being depressed, what they mean is, I'm feeling sorry for myself. They go straight to, I'm very depressed, and they go, those are the words that we use so that we never have to think that we can get out of it. If we want to we're victims of depression. You know what I mean? We're victims. It's not our fault. Don't you understand? I can't help it. I'm a victim. I mean, you've got alcoholism, but I have alcoholism and depression. Now, I know there are people that really have depression. They got to take stuff like that. And I also know that sometimes the drugs are overprescribed. Sometimes they just need to do the Dr. Bob program and not the Bill Wilson program. Because Bill Wilson wrote, and this is what he said. He said, I was going through depression. I didn't understand, why can't the steps work on depression? Why can't stuff work on depression? And he says, I noticed also, there are a lot of old timers. Back then it would have been 15 years. 15 years, because he was the longest guy there. There are a lot of old timers that have passed the booze test. You know, every time you pick up a medallion, you pass the booze test. You know what I mean? One more day, booze test. And you know something? What does it happen when you pick up a medallion? Of course, you're grateful. It's telling you how much you're grateful you are. But there's a little part of your mind is you're thinking, I'm doing okay. Look, I got 1 year, I got 2 years, I got double digit. You know what I mean? And what happens is what an alcoholic's mind does with that is you stop, you almost immediately, by the way, stop thinking about the God thing. You start thinking about, well, you're doing okay because you did the 4-step. You're doing okay because you showed up at me. You're doing okay because you have a sponsor. You think about a million reasons why you're sober because AA tells you that's why you're sober. Doesn't talk about the God thing that much. Oh, yeah, there's that one part in the big book, one part, where it says there is one who has all power. That one is God, and you find him now. That sounds good, but it's really about the 4th and 5th step. Oh, there's that one part where God is everything or he's nothing. God's got to become the central factor of your life. But it's just like it's like a one line. There is a part that says half measures avail you nothing. And there is no middle of the road solution after they said that, but I wouldn't pay much. Oh yeah, there is that part where it says, burn the idea into every alcoholic's mind that he can, no matter anything, as long as he trusts God. Yeah, that's that part. Yeah, they have parts like that in the Bible. Let no man say that he has to have his wife back, his kids back, money back, or anything like that. That's bullshit. They call it nonsense. It's not, the only thing you need is to trust God. There is that part in the big book where it says, but we need you. Well, if you don't need you, Dr. Bob, he says, well, God will handle that, and your real reliance has to be on him. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave, the people you really need to hang out with. And it says, see the relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. And it says, and you will find some of us as you join us in the fellowship of the Spirit, not the fellowship of AA. Because I don't want to, look, I'm just telling you my opinion based upon what I've seen. This is not AA, wonderful fellowship. I love it. Gone to over 40,000 meetings. I said, this is not Well People's Anonymous. I hate to break it to you. It's not Well People's Anonymous, There are people in here, if you listen to them too much, you'll be driven to drink. It'll stunt your growth. You know what I mean? They'll tell you stuff that'll just kill you. But you want to know something? You'll like what they say. Because they'll tell you things which will let you know, no, you don't have to do that. No, you don't have to worry about that. They will tell you, don't listen to that stuff. You know what I mean? This is all you have to do. Now, the truth of the matter is, the program, what you would call the program, doing the steps and all that stuff, will keep you sober. That thing, nothing so ensures sobriety as intensive work with other alcoholics. That's absolutely true. I've done it myself. The reason, even when I hit bottom the second time, the one thing I was doing is intensive work. So that's true until it's not true. It's true until it's not true. So when I see a guy with 20 years in AA drinking, he was helping people all along. It's true until it's not true. There's a lot of people that work with people and do the whole steps and everything, and then one day they're drinking. What happened? I stopped on me. Why you stop? It's true until it's not true. And what will happen is you'll stay sober and be proud of yourself, proud of the program, be doing the whole thing, and then one day you'll be like Bill Wilson or like me in 10 years, and it won't be working for you. And you know loneliness is if you do. Like it says in the big book. Now and then a guy who's, what does it say? A former drinker says, feel better, look better, having a better time, staying sober, doing all that stuff, picking up medallions. You laugh at such Sally. We know he's going to try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. So soon he'll know loneliness is what you do. And especially if he'll wish for the end. So especially, and it happened to Bill Wilson. There'll come a time in every alcoholic's life we'll have no defense against the first drink unless he can do the fourth step. No defense against the first drink unless he gets no. It says no defense against the first drink. His defense has to come from God. You know what I mean? So all that stuff is stuff they say in the big book that we can easily ignore if you're sober and you're smart. And so there's like a Bill Wilson program, which got to the point where he said in that deal he wrote, he said, I've noticed that a lot of oldsters, old timers, they have passed the booze test, but they're not happy. They're not happy. He said they just can't, they don't have emotional sobriety. They're not steady. They're not solid. And then he says, but there are some people in AA. There are some people in AA. I call them, this is what he says, I call them the benighted ones, like the Al Kennedys, that seem to have something that other people don't have. You just notice that they have something that other people don't have. He says, I call them benighted ones. And I've been trying to figure out what the answer is. And then Bill Wilson says this. He says, which shouldn't make you feel too good if you listen to this. I was talking on the way up here with Sergio. He says, I got it all wrong. That's got to make you feel good when he says, I got it all wrong. You're like worshiping Bill Wilson. You're reading, as Bill sees it. You're quoting it. You're having meetings, which is all good. There's a lot of good stuff there. And then you read this thing he wrote. He wrote in 1958 where he said, I got it all wrong. So you're trying to figure out what parts are the good parts and what way to go wrong, what parts are the bad part. And he said, my problem was, he said, I was too dependent on people, places, things, and Alcoholics Anonymous. And your whole life is wrapped around Alcoholics Anonymous. My whole life is wrapped around Alcoholics Anonymous. And you're trying to figure out what the hell is he talking about. And then he says, I knew what the answer was. It was in the prayer of St. Francis. Who knew? Well, you didn't say the voice says the prayer of St. Francis. He says, how do you do that? How do you get to a point in your life where just naturally, you don't think of being loved, you think of loving other people. You don't think about people understanding you, think about trying to understand other people. How do you get to the point where just naturally you think completely different than you usually think, and you don't worry about stuff? Well, you know what that is? That's a serious change in personality. That's not the not drinking thing. That's a change in personality. So the bottom line is you may get to that point. You may not drink, or you may drink and you have to start off, whatever it is. I see a clear distinction. It's clear to me what Dr. Bob's program was about. Dr. Bob's program is God, in his case, the Lord, was the central fact of his life, which has something to do with the sixth step, by the way, because when we get the sixth step next week, the whole point of the sixth step is where people get separated from the spiritual kindergarten. There's this kindergarten, it's a spiritual kindergarten, where we all worship Bill and whatever, and the fellowship and all that sort of stuff. And we pick up the medallion. It's all good stuff. It's not bad stuff. And not but there's another fellowship called the Fellowship of the Spirit, where some people get separated out to that. And you'll notice that sometimes those people are kind of strange because they talk about stuff that has something to do with your thinking. But they don't give a lot of drunkalogs. They give a lot of what I would call faithalogs. They talk about their life and their thinking and what God has done for them. But there's not a lot of drunkalogs. You understand? Not that there's anything wrong. I lived off the drunk. I used to be able to do a great drunkalog. I think I might be able to do it, if you put a gun to my head, but that's not what I talk about. I'm not interested in talking about that. I'm not interested in talking like I have 3 months or even 10 years. I'm in my 46th year. I'm going to talk about what I've learned and what I've done. I'm going to shortchange you. I'm not going to filter myself out. So what happens is you have this situation. So one of the things that happens with me as an attorney, okay, is I have people come to me. This happened to me all my life. It happens to me in AA. and they sit down and they have a problem, some big problem in their lives. And they start talking to me about this big problem they have in their lives. And they say, and this happened, and that happened, and this happened, and this is why, and then because I felt like this, I felt like that. And they're being honest. They're being as honest as they can be. And they may be alcoholics, they may not be alcoholics. They may just be people who are screwed up in their thinking. And they're not drinking, and they're sober, or whatever it is. And in my mind, this is what I'm thinking. If this man ever talks like that in front of a judge, he's not going to go to jail. He's going to be under the fucking jail. You understand what I'm saying? Because he is so delusional and so doesn't understand what he's saying, and he believes what he's saying. And I say what I have to do is I have to take this person, grab him from planet, if his name's Ralph, I got to take him from planet Ralph. I got to take this lady from planet Ralph and bring her back to the planet Earth. Because she is crazy, or he is crazy, you know? And so if I can do that, at least so I can get him to see something. So here's the deal. What does that do? You know, I tell this story. I'm not going to tell the story about this. Some guy called me up who was a PhD in nursing. Might have told you guys this. He calls me up. He says, I'm a PhD in nursing. I'm a year sober. I'm under PRN. They're watching me. I have a child. I'm a single mother with a child. I can't lose my job. And yesterday I had a drink. And I had a drink yesterday. I was on relay. I was the guy in AA that called up for 8 years. And I said, I had a drink. And she says to me, I can't afford to drink. I'll lose my kid. I'll lose my job. I'll lose everything. I need you to tell me to help me. How can I stop drinking? And I said, but there's only one thing. I said, what? He says, I don't want to hear anything about AA. So I said, we got two problems. I said, what's the two problems? He said, well, first problem is I'm 6 years sober. And the only reason I'm sober is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I don't know what plan B is. You're like talking to the wrong guy because all I know is AA. And you're telling me you want to know the answer, but you don't want to hear about AA. And he says, okay, I understand that. I don't know what plan B is. He says, what's the second problem? I said, you called AA. Miss PH fucking, you know what I mean? The woman's a PhD in nursing. He's been through treatment centers. He's going to lose her job. He calls me up. And in her mind, she says, I want to stay sober. Don't talk to me about AA. And she calls AA. That's every person I sponsor. That's every person I've ever met in Alcoholics Anonymous. They start telling me a problem, and then they go into insanity, and they buy into it, and they think their thinking is crazy. And I'm saying, I need to bring this person down to the place. I had a gal call me up. She said, this is what she said. She said, I'm drinking again. I keep on drinking. I go and I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink and I go to treatment centers. And I need a good treatment center in Florida. Give me a good treatment center in Florida. I said, why would you go to a treatment center? She says, well, I need a treatment center. I said, you don't need a treatment center. Have you gone to 7 treatment centers already? And he says, yeah, well, what are you going to learn at the next treatment center? What you want is a vacation. I'll tell you how to fix your drinking. I said, what? He says, what are you, 45 years old? He says, grow the fuck up. She says to me, this is what she says to me. To hurt my feelings, I guess. But she says, you're mean. Yes, I guess I was the wrong guy to call. Some alcoholics need me. See, you don't want to stop drinking. You just want another vacation. Because obviously treatment centers don't work for you. You know? That's what your problem is. Sometimes you need me. You know, and that's the deal. Sometimes so what does this have? So I'm delusional like anything. There's no difference between me. I'm delusional. So, you know, and I want the Dr. Bob sobriety. I didn't even know I wanted it. I'm delusional. So, you know what? I told you about my 4th step. I did my 4th step. It took me 6 months and 2 hours to do my 4th step. Lousiest 4th step in the history. I'm in the Guinness Book of World Record. Lousiest 4th step in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't write the great American novel. I didn't know how to do it because I was sitting in a room and I did what I always do. I'm feeling lousy. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling this. I'm feeling that. I'm feeling this. I know I should do my 4th step, but I haven't done it. Everything. That was my mantra. And some guy that was up to me named Henry that I've never seen before afterwards, he says, you know something? I can help you. He says, really? Yeah, I can help you with that 4th step. He says, really, how can you help? He says, go home tonight. Go pick up the big book, turn to chapter 5, and pick up a fucking pencil. Very mean. Very mean. I went home. I opened the big book to chapter 5 where they have a chart, you know, just in case you're a PhD a PhD or something. They got a chart. I picked up a pencil. I got a piece of paper. I made the chart up. I said, my cousin Valerie, you know how she is. Hate her guts. Why? Because it affects this, that, and the other thing. And I made my list. Probably had 10, 15 people on it. Because I know who I hate and what. Or my list of the. Yeah. Then I read the bit. He says, disregarding Valerie. Okay, what was your fault? After that, my faults. Went through. I did exactly what they told me in the book. I did the big. I didn't need the Hazelton. I didn't need the advanced super PhD thing. And then it came to the next thing. Put down all your fears. Obviously, fear of being broke, fear of not being like being you being humiliated. I put down all my fears. Then talked about the sexual part, and it's not. And that was easy because as you know, I've had more sex than anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, when I had it, I was nervous and anxious, and most of the time I was alone. But the bottom line is, oh, now I know who I'm talking to. I understand what's going on here. Now I got my people here. Okay. I was alone. But the bottom line is I did and I polished off the 4-step in 2 hours. And it's probably the lousiest 4-step, like I said last week. So I did my 4th. So here's the deal. I went, I knew I had to do the 5th step. And so the only person I felt comfortable with for some reason was my psychiatrist. I go to a psychiatrist. I won't go to the psychiatrist. I go to the psychiatrist in my 4th step. I go there and I read the 4th step to him. I pay him $175. I read the 4th step. And he looks back at his things and he says, that's funny. You didn't say anything about drinking when you were with me. Yeah, whatever. He says, we don't tell him the truth or whatever. And that's my 5th step. Okay. Lousiest 5th step in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I go to a meeting that night, like a God thing. They're talking about the 5th step. I've just done the 5th step. I'm feeling great. Guy says this. By the way, all these steps, I don't know if you know this, if you look at the 10th step, all these steps, you do them over and over and over and over again so you can improve. You know what I mean? And that's the bottom line. So it's not a one. It's not a one-off. So guy picks up the microphone or whatever it is, and he says, well, I don't know much about the 5th step, but I know one thing. You can't do it with a psychiatrist. And I put that guy on. Now I've got a new resentment. The guy said, I got a new resentment. I want to kill the guy. I told my sponsor after me, he says, you didn't listen to him. I said, yes, I did. He said, yeah. He says, no. He said, I don't know much about the 5th step. But this is what I think. This is my opinion. This is Alcoholics Anonymous. This ain't Well People's Anonymous. Look at the book. It says perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the one. He doesn't know shit. You know what I mean? You're fine. Don't worry about it. Now, when I do the 4th step and the 5th step, and all of a sudden I see things that I never saw before about my life, about my divorce, and where I was wrong. And that's good. Does that cure you of being insane? No way. You don't go through 31, 32, 45 years of not knowing the truth, not seeing the truth, making excuses, being a total idiot, and feeling comfortable the way you think. And then all of a sudden you do a 4th and 5th step. And that's it. You're cured now. Now you're thinking completely differently. They have this one line in the Bible. It's the greatest line in the world because it applies to alcoholics. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced that Paul that applied to that, and it's in the book. I think it's in the book of James, which, by the way, Dr. Bob said was absolutely essential to read in order to have decent sobriety. That's what he said. It's in Dr. Bob in the Good Old Times, so it's conference approved, but nobody does it. This is what it says. This is the line of the Bible. He says, alcoholics, it doesn't say alcoholics, it says people, but alcoholics are like men and women who look at themselves in the mirror, look at their face, look at themselves in the mirror, and then walk away and forget what they look like. And forget what they look like. So you do a 4th and 5th step, and you see a whole bunch of stuff about yourself, and then you walk away, 2 hours later, you're driving your car, and you forget who you are. You forget who you are. You go back to your old way of thinking, of analyzing things, of resentment. You do the same thing and over. This is why I go to 3 meetings a day. Ever since I've been coming in here, I don't do 90 and 90. In the morning, I go to a 7 a.m. meeting. I talk about this stuff, and I talk about God, and I talk about other people. 12 o'clock, I go to another meeting on Zoom. Zoom makes it easy now. I used to do it, when before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I go to the South Dixie meeting. I mean, all my friends, all 50 people who were there, and they all know me and love it. I talk about this stuff. We talk about other people. Now, tonight, I'm here. This is like a fourth meeting, during the day. And this is why we do all this stuff. Do the 4 hour. You know why I do that? Because in the morning it says we ask God to direct our attention to Him, direct our thinking to Him. I do that because I don't have medium alcoholism. I have serious alcoholism, where what happens is I walk away from the mirror and I forget who I am. I forget who I am. And you know what happens when you go to 3 meetings a day, and then maybe a fourth one at night, or maybe you go to a workshop that lasts 4 hours, as crazy and drastic as, you know what happens? I don't forget. You know what happens when you do that for 46 years? Well, let me tell you something. You get a new personality. You lose fear of people and economic insecurities. You find peace. But you try to sell that in alcohol. They don't. Well, I go to 3 meetings a week. I go to 4. I say, oh, really? How's that working out for you? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I just say, I'm going to tell you what I do. And I got 4. This is what I do. And some of them, most of them look at me like I'm strange and I'm crazy, because I am crazy. And some people start going to the meetings and they completely change. After 3 or 4 weeks of that, it's like they're a whole different change. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because this lady's looking at her watch. Because nobody, God forbid I should say something I go over that's now exactly the right time, okay?
Reminder. Thank you.
Recovery inspiration is sitting right there waiting for you. Rocketed.org AA speaker recordings brings real voices and real stories straight to your ears. Subscribe now so you never miss a new recording dropping. Keep that motivation on tap and help spread the word. Hit subscribe and let recovery find you every single day.